the moment she spotted the helicopter flying in the park. Her face twisted like she had just seen something illegal, and that's when the trouble started. Linda marched toward us with the kind of determination that immediately made my stomach tighten. You could almost hear the imaginary sirens going off in her head. Her arms were crossed, and she wore that familiar expression that every neighbor in the community had seen before. The one that meant someone was about to get a lecture. "Excuse me?" she called out sharply as she approached. Ethan looked up at me, confused, his small hands still holding the controller. The helicopter buzzed softly above the grass, drifting a little to the left as he lost focus. "Yes," I replied, trying to stay polite. "You can't fly that here," she said, pointing dramatically at the little helicopter like it was a dangerous drone. I blinked. "It's a toy helicopter," I said calmly. "We're just practicing." She shook her head immediately. "It doesn't matter. The HOA has rules about flying devices in common areas. It's a safety issue." Meanwhile, Ethan whispered, "Dad, am I in trouble?" My heart sank a little, hearing that. The poor kid had waited all week to try his birthday present, and now he looked like someone had just told him Christmas was canceled. "No, buddy," I reassured him softly. "You're doing great." Linda wasn't finished. "You need to land that immediately," she insisted, raising her voice slightly. "Someone could get hurt. That thing could hit someone, or crash into a window." At that moment, Mr. Ramirez from 2 houses down slowed his evening walk and watched the scene unfold. A couple of other neighbors sitting on a bench nearby were clearly listening too. "It's about 3 feet off the ground," I said. "We're being careful." But Linda had already pulled out her phone. "If you don't stop, I'm calling the HOA board," she declared. Ethan looked up again, worried. The helicopter drifted higher as his attention slipped. Okay, I said gently to him. "Let's bring it down." He carefully moved the control stick, concentrating hard. The helicopter descended slowly, almost perfectly. Almost just as it was about to land, a sudden breeze swept through the park. The tiny helicopter wobbled wildly and veered off course. Ethan gasped. The little machine zipped sideways, right toward Linda. She shrieked and ducked dramatically, throwing her arms over her head like it was a swarm of bees, instead of a toy the size of a sandwich. Neighbors burst out laughing. The helicopter didn't even touch her. It simply drifted past and landed harmlessly in the grass a few feet away. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then Mr. Ramirez chuckled. "That was the most dangerous helicopter attack I've ever seen." The bench crowd laughed again. Linda's face turned bright red. Ethan looked up at me. "Dad, did I almost crash into her?" I knelt down and picked up the helicopter, checking that it was okay. "Nope," I said with a smile. "You actually handled that pretty well." One of the neighbors called out, "Let the kid fly his helicopter, Linda." More laughter followed. Linda huffed, shoved her phone back into her pocket, and stormed off without another word. Ethan's smile slowly returned. "Can I try again?" he asked hopefully. I looked around at the neighbors, who were now watching with amused interest. "Yeah, buddy," I said, setting the helicopter back on the grass. "Let's fly." Karen had already decided she was right, and what she did next shocked everyone. Without another word, she suddenly stepped forward and reached toward the helicopter as it hovered just above the grass. Before Ethan or I could react, she swatted at it with her hand like it was a giant mosquito. "Hey!" I shouted. The tiny helicopter spun wildly from the impact. Its blades whirred loudly as it tumbled sideways and crashed into the grass. Ethan gasped, "My helicopter!" he cried, running toward it. Karen stood there like she had just saved the entire neighborhood from a major disaster. "That's exactly what I was talking about," she said, brushing off her hands. "It could have hit someone." For a moment, I couldn't even process what had just happened. She had literally knocked a toy out of the air, in front of a 5-year-old dot. Ethan picked it up carefully, looking at it with wide, worried eyes. "Dad, is it broken?" he asked quietly. I knelt down next to him, and examined the helicopter. One of the small landing skids had popped loose, but thankfully the blades still looked intact. "I think it's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We can fix that." But the situation was quickly drawing attention. The couple with the dog had walked closer now. A teenager on a bike slowed down nearby, watching. Even Mr. Ramirez from down the street had stopped his walk again. The woman with the dog shook her head. "Did you really just knock a kid's toy out of the air?" she asked Karen. Karen turned to her immediately. "It's against HOA rules," she insisted. "Someone has to enforce them." Mr. Ramirez crossed his arms and chuckled. "Linda, it's a toy helicopter. The kid's flying at 2 feet off the ground." Karen pointed toward Ethan like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom. "It's still an aircraft." At that point, the teenager on the bike couldn't hold back an aircraft. He laughed. "It's smaller than my sandwich." A few people laughed quietly. Karen's face tightened. "This isn't funny," she snapped. "If that thing hit someone's face, you'd all be thanking me." Ethan was still standing beside me, clutching the helicopter carefully. His excitement from earlier had faded into nervous silence. "I stood up slowly, ma'am," I said firmly, but politely. "You just knocked a toy out of a 5-year-old's hands. That's not okay." Karen opened her mouth to argue again, but before she could respond, the woman with the dog spoke up. "My kids fly RC cars here all the time," she said. "Nobody's ever had a problem." "Exactly," Mr. Ramirez added. "It's a park." Karen looked around and realized something she clearly didn't expect. No one was on her side. People were shaking their heads. A couple of neighbors were whispering to each other. For the first time, she seemed slightly unsure. "Well," she said stiffly, straightening her posture, "I'm reporting this to the HOA board." Then she turned sharply and marched back across the grass the same way she had arrived. The park was quiet for a second. Then the teenager on the bike said, "That was the most intense helicopter battle I've ever seen." A few neighbors laughed. Ethan looked up at me again. "Dad, can I still fly it?" I smiled and fixed the loose landing skid. "Of course," I said. And this time, when the helicopter lifted into the air again, half the neighborhood was watching and cheering for the tiny aircraft. The situation was spiraling fast, and Karen had no idea what kind of chaos she had just started. Ethan clung tightly to my shoulder, crying into my shirt, while I tried to calm him down. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered. "You're okay. I've got you." His small arm had a faint red mark where the helicopter had hit him, but it didn't look serious. Still, seeing him so scared made my heart race. Meanwhile, the park had completely changed. What had been a quiet afternoon only minutes ago was now filled with raised voices and angry neighbors. "Why would you throw that at him?" the woman with the dog demanded. Karen threw her hands up in frustration. "I didn't throw it at him," she insisted. "I threw it away. That thing is dangerous." "Dangerous?" the teenager with the bike said incredulously. "It weighs like 2 ounces. Mr. Ramirez stepped closer, shaking his head. "Linda, you crossed a line," he said firmly. "You can't grab a kid's toy and throw it at him." Karen looked around and realized nearly everyone in the park was staring at her now. A few parents had walked over from nearby houses, their children trailing behind them. One father asked, "What happened?" "She threw his helicopter at him," someone answered immediately. The man's eyes widened. "I'm kidding." Karen's face was turning red again. But this time, it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from anger. "You're all overreacting," she snapped. "I was enforcing the HOA rules by attacking a toy," the woman with the dog replied. Ethan was still sniffing against my shoulder. I gently set him down on the nearby bench, so I could look at his arm again. "You okay, champ?" I asked softly. He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. "Is my helicopter broken?" he asked between sniffles. I picked it up from the grass and checked it over. One blade was bent, but the body was intact. "I think we can fix it," I told him with a reassuring smile. Behind us, the argument continued. A mother who had just arrived crossed her arms and looked straight at Karen. Honestly, Linda, this isn't the first time you've done something like this. Several neighbors murmured in agreement. Karen's eyes widened. Excuse me, you're always yelling at kids for playing. The mother continued. Last month, you tried to stop them from drawing chalk on the sidewalk. That's different, Karen argued. Those are HOA regulations. Mr. Ramirez sighed. Linda, he said calmly, there's enforcing rules. And then there's scaring a 5-year-old. For a moment, Karen seemed completely outnumbered. She looked around at the circle of neighbors, none of whom appeared to support her. But instead of backing down, she did the opposite. Fine, she snapped, pulling her phone out again. If none of you care about safety, I'll call someone who does. Who? The teenager asked. The HOA board, she replied sharply. A few neighbors laughed. One man muttered, "Good luck," explaining that one. Karen glared at everyone one last time before turning and storming off across the park. Phone pressed dramatically to her ear as she disappeared down the sidewalk. The tension slowly melted away. The woman with the dog knelt beside Ethan. "Hey there," she said gently. "That was some brave helicopter flying earlier."